Alright, let's go ahead and get started. Thanks for coming and hanging out. Today we're going to talk about, can AI make you, me, everyone a better dungeon master, a judge, a game master, whatever you call it in your system, keeper, storyteller. There's a lot of names. But we are talking about, dungeon master, game master, and how AI can be a resource, maybe. And so I wanted to dive into it a little bit because I personally haven't used AI really much, as far as certainly not running games, but even prepping games. I haven't really used it. I've been curious about it for a while, and I just haven't sort of gotten around to sort of giving it a try. But I've had a number of friends sort of tell me about their success, including using ChatGPT as like one of their DM tools for like descriptions or coming up with adventure ideas, or I know it's really good. A lot of dungeon masters use it for like letters and speeches and monologues and those sorts of things. So I've been curious about it. So what would ChatGPT sort of give me as the best tips for new dungeon masters? So I thought that would be a nice, easy way to sort of try out and be like, okay, does this have any merit? Does it have some sort of fundamental understanding about the role of the dungeon master and what the dungeon master does, and can sort of sift through what is good advice and maybe what is not good advice? And no, I know it's not a thinking thing. AI at this stage is not a thinking sort of algorithm, but it is a consolidation and accretion of a bunch of different sources, and sort of kind of cleaving it down to the lowest common denominator and kind of spinning that back out, which I think is what myself and I think other people who are not super on hype about the AI revolution are kind of coming at that angle from, because it doesn't invent anything and it doesn't do anything that's new or different. It really just kind of gives you the best of kind of volumes based off of the information it has. So I figured let's go ahead and hop in and let's take a look at it. So like I said, I dropped that into ChatGPT and was like, here, let me drop this in, let me see what it spits out, and let's take a look at it and see, is this good advice? Should I be using ChatGPT more as a resource for dungeon mastering in general? When I have an issue, should I bring that to ChatGPT? Will it give me usable information, advice, resources? Is this going to be a good resource for my journey as a dungeon master? And, maybe for you too. Well, let's find out together, right? So let's go ahead and jump over and let's pull up the document. There we go. So we've got just, quick tips. It's got spit out like sort of 10 at me, and I was like, all right, well, let's get these 10 done. Let me move this a little bit. There we go. So let's look at these 10. So quick tips for new dungeon masters. So it's first tip, start small with a one-shot adventure. Okay, yeah. Why one-shots are ideal for new DMs. Simple to prepare and manage with a clear beginning, middle, and end. That's all very true. Removes the pressure of long-term planning and managing multiple storylines. Okay, yeah. Sure, yes. It's not running a campaign, it's an adventure. And offers low-stakes introduction to DMing. Yes, I agree with that. Where to find one-shot adventures. Check platforms like DM's Guild, DriveThruRPG, or the official D&D website for pre-made modules and simple adventures. Yeah, so let me kind of think about that. I think now that I've been doing this for a while, I would say at this point, if somebody was interested in becoming a dungeon master, I think even now, before I pointed them at running some sort of one-shot, I would at this point consider telling them, try running a solo adventure, like some solo D&D. Because I know from myself, after playing solo D&D for a while, and introducing a number of sort of like new people to the concept, it's probably my favorite, maybe even the best that I know of, way to build someone's confidence in the skills that it takes to be a dungeon master, and nudge potential dungeon masters sort of like towards the seat, behind the screen. That's how I feel about that now. Yeah, that's usually where I'm going to be. If somebody's interested in dungeon mastering, because I think that there's a huge gap that you have to jump there from thinking about, oh, that looks like fun. I think that I would have fun doing that, to being overwhelmed by, oh, but the skills of running the table, I don't know how to get proficient in that, and basically start off proficient in that. And of course the secret there is you can't, and that's sort of like what shies people away oftentimes from running one-shots. So I think today I would say, let's do like a solo adventure. We'll do it like a buddy thing, and you and I will run together, and you can see how easy, because it's kind of there's no screen with a dungeon master on the other side, so you also have to kind of fill in some of those roles. And so through practice, and there's not this idea that you not being good at it is going to mean that people around the table aren't going to have fun. Because if you're doing it solo, it's just you or you and another person, you're doing it together. So there's sort of that shared culpability, or or you're just not going to disappoint anybody else because you're the only audience member, right? You're the only player. So I would nudge people sort of towards that, I think, now. I do think for the resources, it's hard to determine what is or is not a good adventure without having experience running adventures, if that makes sense. I feel like once you start to internalize encounter building, adventure designing, once you run through a bunch of one-shots, you start to internalize that knowledge. And as you do that, you can start building your own one-shots using something like the 5-room dungeon method, or some other sort of simple framework to sort of make easy adventures one-shots to kind of get you into from just being able to run D&D into sort of designing, doing the backstage work that a dungeon master or game master has to do, such as like building adventures and storylines and all those sorts of things, and making it gel at the table. But it is hard to determine what is or is not a good adventure. Yeah, there's a rating system, but still, even that is reviews. You're not going to know why people rated things a lot of the time. And if they are the same sort of player or dungeon master, they're looking for the same things out of an adventure module that you might need, and what you might consider good versus bad adventure design, or as an aid to run adventures. So the easiest thing I can say is just to run it, right? You just kind of have to run it to know for sure. So I'd say, yeah, grab someone's. Obviously, you should probably go with higher rated ones. Well, I don't know, because there is a quote that's from, I think it's Alan Moore, where he talks about reading bad books and watching bad movies and reading bad comic books. Whatever media that you consume is to also consume bad versions of it, because that gives you the ideas of what not to do, which can be more helpful than looking at really well polished done things. The same way that if you looked at something like Critical Role and it's like you're going to measure yourself against that, whether if you found just some random actual play on Twitch or YouTube or wherever of just, just some rando sitting around the table and be like, oh no, this is actually the level of game that I'm trying to reach, and this seems significantly more achievable because there's not 100 people behind the camera with a bunch of sort of Hollywood experience working on that. So yeah, I think just grab one-shots, because you're not going to know if they're good or bad, really, and just run them as fast as you can. I think it's probably my best advice there. So overall, yeah, this is good advice, but it's not. It doesn't have any context to it, which ChatGPT is probably not ever going to be able to give you. Any context for why it's good or bad advice. So, tip number 2, which is an interesting one. Prioritize storytelling over rules. So, why the story comes first. Obviously, I have thoughts about this, but let me read it off first. Why story comes first. Players want a fun, immersive experience driven by creativity and narrative, not strict rule adherence. Okay. I'm on board. How to keep the game flowing. Oh, okay. That's a different topic. That is a different topic. That's about tempo and pacing. That's... Okay, let's keep reading. If unsure about a rule, make a quick call to maintain momentum and look it up later. Focus on the basics like combat rules, skill checks, and initiative while staying flexible. Oh. Okay. Alright, I think the AI is sort of failing us here on this one. We're just kind of like, it doesn't feel like a fully formed thought with that tip. So prioritizing storytelling over rules. So yes, the answer is yes, but there's a big but. I'd say only if you're playing with a group of newbies. And otherwise, I think the rules are very, very important. And it's not necessarily like we always have to play raw or anything like that. It's just that consistent rules and DM adjudications in the game is, I think, really undervalued in a lot of people's minds. But it's an incredibly sort of important part of the gaming experience. The rules are not a reality simulator, but they are sort of a shared common framework. They're used to understand and adjudicate situations. Like that's what the rules do. They're a framework to be able to adjudicate a situation. And have some sort of system, a system that's robust enough that the rulings feel, the adjudications feel consistent. So there's a consistency in the world, even if it's not reality. It's not realism, but it is consistency. And that is very important to the gaming experience. So those rules, I think, are very important. And what separates D&D from any other tabletop RPG is the rules that you use, is that rules framework. Because if you're not doing that, you're just making up a story around the table with friends, and if you do that, you kind of go back to the old Gary Gygax quote about, I just roll the dice because I like the sound it makes, and the dice don't actually mean anything. Interesting guy. He was an interesting guy. So I think it's suffice it to say, if you don't know the rules, or you're outright ignoring the rules at the table, you're not really playing D&D at that point. There's nothing wrong with that. But if you're going to invite somebody finds out you have a D&D game, and you invite, and they're like, oh yeah, I've been playing for years, and you invite this experienced player to your, D&D game that you're not really using any of the rules correctly, any of the common framework, and you have this person show up to your game, you can expect for them to be sort of like confused or probably even disappointed, because they sat down to a game that they thought, had this shared system that they already knew, and then they sat down and were like, oh, you're not using this system, and I built a character that uses this system, so now my character doesn't make sense of the game, and none of their abilities work the way that I thought that they would work, and right, it makes a confusing and kind of disappointing experience as a game for that person, because they're like, there's no consistency, I don't know what the framework is that we're using. So that makes it really hard to make decisions and plan out actions and do all the things that you need to do using the rules of a TTRPG to sort of like further the adventure that you're working on. So yeah, so that's kind of why I don't think stories should come first. Not because I have anything against stories or story games or rules-like games. I like all of those things. I just think the rules are important because that's the defining feature of playing one RPG over another RPG. And when you talk about playing D&D, that you and the person, everybody else who's participating in that, are speaking a shared language where we can all communicate and understand one another because we're all speaking the same language. We're all on the same page. So the second part is, then it kind of flips around and talks specifically about sort of understanding the basic rules of the game, which is very... So, like, the rules aren't important, but you need to know the rules. So, you get that whiplash, not cohesive thought that I'm starting to see that we're going to get probably a lot of from the AI, from ChatGPT. So, because it's really about pacing and keeping the game moving, but not too fast, but not too slow. It's very important, but it's sort of a learned skill, honed through experience. I'm not sure that you can really teach somebody pacing, especially at the beginning of their Dungeon Master journey. That would not be a thing that I would be trying to do. Like they said, you need to get the basic rules down, and that would be my advice. Like, get the basic rules down pat, the different types of actions and tests, the common modifiers, how to improvise DCs and modifiers, and limited damage and effects, and kind of get the basic maths and the action economy and all that stuff sort of under your hat first. I think that's the best thing to do, to sort of prepare yourself to run the game. And then I would print out a quick reference sheet for yourself. If you have any other new players, print one out for them. Anything you can't verify on that sort of quick reference sheet, which is going to cover, like, between you, what you've learned about the basic rules, some of the outlier stuff that's going to be on that quick reference document. You should be able to make a call or know what the rules are very quickly, look the rules up very quickly for probably 80% of situations. Sure, there's always going to be that one weird one that's like grappling and flying, and then I'm paralyzed, but am I still flying? Am I hovering? Did I drop? How much fall damage do I take? How many d6 is that? And those sorts of questions. So I'd say if you don't know it and it's not on the quick reference sheet, just make a call to keep the game going. And then I would say assign a player, because most of the time this is going to happen in combat. Assign one of the players who's probably turn it just was, and be like, hey, will you look that up while it's not your turn, basically, while we're doing everything else, and come back and let us know if that was the right ruling or what we want to do about that. That would probably be how I would approach it. So as far as trying to keep up tempo for a new Dungeon Master, it's like, don't worry about it too much, get the basic rules down, have a quick reference like aid that you and players can share to look things up. If you can't look it up, and if you don't know it and you can't look it up in that quick reference sheet, make a call and have somebody else look it up real quick. You can have other people around the table do stuff for you. You don't have to always be the person who looks up the rule, or the person who always looks up spells or something like that. You have other people, usually around the table or in the chat, or if you're playing online or anything like that, like have them look that stuff up, because they're going to have more time than you as a Dungeon Master. Alright, let's keep moving. So that was tip number 2. Tip number 3 is keep combat simple at first. Why simplicity works. Alright. Combat can become overwhelming with too many rules, enemies, or abilities. Starting small keeps things manageable and the game running smoothly. Yep, I agree. How to simplify combat. Use a few basic enemies like goblins or wolves, and straightforward mechanics. Okay, yes. Stick to simple environments and track HP with pen and paper for ease. Okay. I'm not even sure that that's really even a... Again, that doesn't feel like a fully formed tip, really. But it is... Right. Keeping it simple is important. I would say, yeah. Overall, it's KISS all day. Like, keep it simple, stupid. Create simple, open-ended challenges, I think. I think doing that, right, we talk a lot about creating obstacles or challenges rather than problems, because problems have a single solution, whereas obstacles are just a thing that you have to get past, and that means going through it, over it, around it, behind it, moving it out of the way. However you get past it is however you get past it. That gives you a lot of flexibility as a Dungeon Master, to be like, well, you have to do it the one way. If you remove that sort of like from your DM vocabulary, you're like, oh, you just need to get there, and there are things in the way. And however you want to deal with that is however you want to deal with that. And you can try just about anything. And I don't know if it's going to work. I have to figure that out. But you can try just about anything. So I'd say never underestimate the player's ability to make things more complicated. So keeping it simple is important. Because the players are going to immediately muddy any of the waters that you put them in. Even the most simple, I mean, we've all had experiences, probably on both sides of the table, of the puzzles for babies situation where you have players that are just like, I can't figure out this puzzle. And, you know, the DM's like, this puzzle's really easy. Right, we've all had those situations, probably on both sides of the screen. So you don't have to worry about things being too easy. That's usually not a huge concern. I feel like, but I do think it's important with your players. The best thing you can do is sort of like listen to their conversation. You know you're doing a good job as a dungeon master when you don't have to do anything, if that makes sense. So if you can sit back and the players are talking back and forth and doing their own thing and engaging with the world and content, and trying to figure things out and making plans and having in-character role play and doing all that stuff, then you know that you've hit a good situation. So I'd say to listen to that conversation if you can get it running. They have a cool idea, see if you can work it into the flexible challenges of your adventure. Anytime you could do that's always nice. So if somebody's like, oh, I wonder if this is something related to my character's backstory, something, and you're like, no, but that's a pretty cool idea. Let me see if I can find a way. I'm gonna make a note. Let me see if I can find a way to work that in somewhere. And you can do that, and that's one of the benefits of having those, being able to listen to those conversations. And then you look like a gigabrain, 5-head dungeon master when they're like, oh man, I can't believe we figured that out. I can't believe we were right. That's such a cool plot, and blah blah blah. And you're like, yeah, it was definitely that the whole time, and I didn't just heap stuff on there because of you guys. It was just a bad guy doing bad things. It wasn't very deep. So I know recently I'm talking about sort of prepping as far as then like keeping it simple and how players can complicate things. I recently a friend was impressed with me because I ran 3 sessions of D&D off of like 2 pages of prep, and they were like, I don't know how you could do that. And I was like, well, yeah, I mean, you just kind of create an area and then you let the players kind of explore the space, and they'll fill in the gaps between your sort of like prep notes. So if you keep it simple, you're going to want to do that because your players are definitely going to make things more complicated as the adventure goes. Adventures only get more complicated when you start adding more people to them. The situations get more complicated, they take longer, they can be more difficult. They never get simpler, they never get easier at the table, they always get more complicated. So keep that in mind. So keep it simple in the beginning, in the planning stages, and it will naturally become more complicated. Talking about, let's look at their like sort of enemy types. I think I agree for that. I think even day 3 enemy types is about the max of what I put in the combat encounter. 3 different enemy types, just because I don't want to manage a wall of stat blocks for one fight. So yeah, I usually try to do more than 1. I try to do 2 if I can, just to keep some variety. But yeah, as a new dungeon master, don't worry about that. Like, you can just run a pack of goblins. It's fine. And then at some point you'll be like, it's getting a little boring. And once things get boring for you as a dungeon master, that's when you're like, okay, now's the time where I can start to maybe sort of mix it up and do some different stuff. So I know from my end, to keep things simple, like I said, I use max of usually like 3 enemy types. I use a passive monster initiative. If you've watched me play the solo RPG series, then you've seen that before. It's just 10 plus our initiative mod. and then I use it in counting up to track monster damage versus HP, rather than clocking down HP. It's just faster and easier. That's how our brains are wired. It's just easier to do addition than subtraction. So, that helps. Featureless white plane combat kind of loses its luster fast, I'd say. So what I try to usually do is create a real space for the combat and show the players how to use the environment to their advantage by having the monsters use it to their advantage. And for that, I mean things like cover, concealment, using elevations, choke points, those sorts of things. Anything like that. Screens, portcullises, doors, using items in weird ways, bombs, traps, all sorts of stuff. Hazards. Using those sorts of things, and then show the players that they can use them by having the monsters use it to their advantage. Because most of those things kind of work both ways, like cover. Let's see. Other things. So, yeah, I'd add that for combat. I'd also look at, if you're ready to sort of move from featureless white plane combat, you want to mix it up a little bit, I'd say maybe change the monster's goal from the like sort of default kill the PCs to something else. Try to think about, okay, and this will help you in a lot of aspects of DMing, especially for adventures and doing adventure prep. You know, what do the bad guys want? Why do they want it? Why is that an issue for the party? Like, if you think about those sort of like 3 questions when you're coming up with a situation, you'll have a pretty good handle about, even if somebody asks you an interesting question about it, or they want to try to get some insight about what's going on or something like that. If you have that, if you've thought about those things and you have those sort of like kicking around your brain, even if it's not like a fully fleshed out idea, you can be like, yeah, actually you're asking about this weird thing. You do notice that this happens because, you know, the monster's goal was this, so they're gonna have this there, and you notice that off of them. Very, very simple stuff. And then maybe sort of like add one new thing to combat. If you're getting bored of sort of like the white plane combat, try to find, one of the things that I like to do is I like to look for sort of 2 monster abilities that have like a fun complement to each other, like having a monster like wolves or something like that knocks characters prone, and then having some other sort of monster that uses a lot of dex saves, and so you can prone them so people have disadvantage on their dex saves. Just to kind of get a little like symbiotic relationship about like how they work together really well. It's gonna be a lot of fun as a dungeon master to keep things fresh. When we talked about tricks and traps, but any HOTS, which is hazards, obstacles, tricks, and traps, any sort of that, adding that as part of a combat is really interesting. Terrain features, movement modes. Like I've run many a combat where the player characters are climbing. So it's a totally different form of movement that they have to deal with and attack with, and something that usually engages their hands. And how do you fight when you need to hold on to a cliffside or a rope or a ladder or whatever you're using to climb? And usually fighting flying or things that can naturally crawl, like spiders and stuff on the walls. That's a nice way to just kind of keep things fresh, I guess. Which I realize that I'm basically, my advice has basically been complicate combat when the AI tip is keep combat simple at first. And I do agree with that. Yeah, keep it simple, and then those are examples of ways you can, once you have things down pat and you feel like things are starting to get a little stale with the very basic combat, some things that kind of zhuzh it up to make it a little bit better. So, really that's what I'm trying to focus on. Okay, that's good. Tip 3. Tip number 4. Be prepared, but stay flexible. Okay, so another sort of improv thing. Okay. Striking the balance. Preparation helps the game keep the game on track, but flexibility ensures it stays engaging and player-driven. Yes. Sure. Efficient preparation tips. Okay, so now it's about efficient prep. Alright. So it's supposed to be from a time perspective, or from everything that you write down will show up in the game? I don't know. Let's assume both then. That there's not a lot of fat in your prep content. Probably is what they mean. Draft a loose outline with key events, NPCs, and locations. Okay, yeah. Keep a few plot hooks ready for when players go off script. Okay. Adapt to player choices. Embrace improvisation. Yeah, embrace improvisation and let the story evolve based on their decisions. Yes. Okay. So, interesting points. Be prepared but stay flexible. That's like, sure, but that's a lot easier said than done. Like, you know what's great about not going to the hospital? Just don't get sick. Oh, don't get sick. I didn't think about that. Don't get sick or injured. Silly me. I haven't been doing that. I think WebDM's advice is probably the sage and evergreen thing when it comes to prep. Only prep what you're not comfortable improvising. So yeah, obviously when you're a new DM, you're not probably comfortable with any improvisation because you haven't done a lot of it yet. So you don't really know what you need to improvise, what you can improvise, what you need prepped, what you don't need prepped. And that's just, the growing pains of being a DM, really. As you become more comfortable with whatever system you're running, whether that's D&D, Pathfinder, Call of Cthulhu, etc. As you run more, whatever your system is, your game master duties and your players, you become more comfortable with what you're doing as a DM, the system, who your players are, what they are, what their characters are like, the less you'll need to sort of like overtly prep. You'll internalize a lot of that stuff, and you'll start to have a better idea of what you think your players might think about X, Y, and Z, and what you think they would do. And okay, they're playing a paladin, and they're at this level, so now they have this ability. Okay, I want to work in a way to like kind of showcase that. And that kind of starts to be more of sort of your prep stuff, and a little bit less of trying to richly detail every potential facet of the game that might come up in a session, which is not helpful. So, yeah, unfortunately, there's just not a lot of great ways to sort of prepare you for that. You just kind of have to move through it as Dungeon Master, unfortunately. There's not a lot of learning you can do up front, like book learning that you can do, rather than just the learned experience of doing something, which I think is what you have to do. So that way, that's the only way you're going to know what you need to prep and what you need to be successful at improvising. That's the only way you're going to know, is to do it, unfortunately. So what would I prep? So their efficient prep tips are sort of make an outline with some lists of key events, NPCs, and locations, and keep plot hooks ready. Okay, what would I say instead? Because I don't think that's bad, but that's just having lists, and lists, at least for me, is not in and of itself super useful. I'm just having like a bunch of unassociated things that I'm trying to cobble together into a cohesive whole at the table while I'm also trying to run a game of D&D. Is trying to come up with a story, like lay down the tracks for the train as it's going. So I'm not sure that's helpful, especially for a new Dungeon Master who's already probably going to feel pretty overwhelmed based off all the sort of plates they're trying to keep spinning when they're running the game. So I would make like a full adventure outline. I'd make one that's like super simple. Like we said, keep it simple. With some like titpole encounters. With plenty of sort of like we talked about, that malleable space or options between them that you can sort of drop in when you need content, ignore when you don't need it, those sorts of things. So I think once you have that, then you can have those like short lists of like they were talking about with the AI recommendation. Short list of like encounter groupings, including random encounters, and some locations that are important, some items and treasures, some lore, some clues, some secrets, NPCs, dressing, obstacles and asides, and some sort of map. It doesn't have to be like a fully formed grid map, but it can just be like a mind map. That's usually what I do. That illustrates sort of like the proximity of different locations, like especially those important sort of tentpole encounters. And so you can understand the relationship of like how the party will move through the space, which is very important. Which will answer a lot of questions for you and for the players as they come up with whatever zany hijinks they come up with. Let's see. I'd also say one of the things to maybe focus on for prep is being able to answer the 6 W questions about the adventure. So you have like your tentpole outline, you've got your sort of like mind map of what it is, where everything is, some lists about stuff, and then I'd be like, okay, can I answer the 6 W questions about the adventure? And of course the W questions are who, what, when, where, why, and whoa. That's how spelled backwards. So if you can answer those questions about your adventure, you're going to be in a good place. Like, let me think of an example. Let's do like the Mine of Phandelver, because it's probably a published one module that most people kind of know or are familiar with. Alright, let's do the Cragmaw, the cave hideout with the goblins. Alright, so who in the adventure? Alright, well, we're talking about bad guys, so goblins. And, right, we have a missing person. It's been so long since I've run it that this might have been a bad example choice based off of what I can remember of it. Goblins. We know that they've got sort of 2 factions in there, right? They've got the he's a bugbear, right? You've got the bugbear, and then you've got like the goblin boss. So what are they doing? Well, they're ambushing people on the roads, and they're taking their stuff back to their hideout. You know, basic banditry, doing that sort of stuff. Okay, when are they doing it? Well, they're going to have to be doing it during the day, because travelers aren't around at night, even though goblins, I think, generally prefer to be up and about during the night. So they're going to be kind of like off their sleep schedule. You might want to bring that up as part of the adventure, that they seem kind of sleep deprived, or they have the inverse of like night shift workers, shift worker syndrome. They're all kind of screwed up because they're in daylight all the time when they're not biologically supposed to be. So you can do that. Where? Well, you need to know where the road is, where that ambush location is, and you need to know where the hideout is. So, and how far away those are, and how relations, and how you move from one spot to the other. So you move from that spot, you follow up, you find the goblins outside the cave, maybe. You have that interaction, and then you're actually inside the next location. There's a little gatekeeper section there, too. So that's the where, and why. Why are they doing that? I don't remember why the Cragmaw goblins are doing anything. Like I said, it's been a while since I've looked at that adventure. I think that's where... Is that where you get the first clues about the actual bandits in town? Like the actual thugs, ruffians, gang in town? I think maybe so. I think maybe that's where the first clue for it is. So, the why would be them working together. And I'm sure there's probably, other than just basic loot, I'm sure there's some other reason why they're doing it, but I can't remember what that is off the top of my head. And then our last question, whoa or how? How are they doing it? Well, obviously they use really good arrows. They shoot people with arrows, bows and arrows. That's what's going on with the dead horse that's in the road. That's definitely what we saw happened with a lot of early parties. With the starter adventure getting killed in that first goblin ambush encounter. Definitely seem People go down in that encounter. Lots of people go down in that encounter. First level is real squishy, even if you're a fighter. So yeah, if you can answer those questions about that, you're going to have a good idea of how to answer questions for your players about the adventure, and understanding sort of what's kind of going on in the different sort of factions and people and what's going on with them. Like, as far like why you would know that they don't like the bugbear, they want to overthrow the bugbear. Why do they want to do that? Because the bugbear sucks and they don't like him. And he probably beats them and all sorts of weird stuff. And he's got those dogs, and that's one of the things that's sort of, or they're wolves, right? It's one of the things that's sort of keeping them from, taking him out. Yeah, so it says that the AI advice is to have some like quest hooks ready, some like plot hooks. I think certainly as a new dungeon master, you're probably, and even as an experienced dungeon master, you might want it. But as a new dungeon master, you're definitely going to need it. Something more than just a quest hook, I feel like. I think you're going to need something. If you throw out a quest hook, and they say, yes, we want to do that quest hook, and stop doing whatever they're doing to start working on that quest hook, as a new DM, I think you're going to be in a, like, oh shit situation. I don't have anything planned for this. I'm not real good at improvising yet. Like, I don't know how to do a lot of that yet. So, what do I do? So you might want something a little bit more, and even as an experienced dungeon master, you might be like, I don't want to, like, because it can be kind of exhausting, too. Depending on, some people love doing it. And I find it exhausting to be like, well, let me go invent another adventure off the dome real quick. While we're playing it. So what I'd say is to include what I call a parachute file, and I've got one in my DM binder. And it's just sort of like the back pocket of the binder, and I toss in like 3 roughly level and biome appropriate one-shot adventures, like one-page adventures, one-page dungeons and stuff like that, and just toss those in there. And be like, oh, well, if the players decide to make a right turn, or they're not interested, they're not picking up the quest hook, or they've screwed something up, or they just finished something really easily. They had the wizard had that one spell that just basically hand waves an adventure, which, sometimes, like, it happens. They're like, oh, well, there's going to be this big, like, you could be like, oh, well, there's the big bad guy shows up in town, and he's like an apparition or something, or a fiend or something like that, like, shows up to do, like, their, like, early monologue in the adventure, like, in the town square, and the wizard's like, or it would be the cleric, right? The cleric's like, banish. And, well, there's nobody there to interrupt his concentration for a minute, so my bad guy is just gone. We're about a third of the way into the adventure. What do I do? And then you're like, well, I have this one-page dungeon. Hey, great work. We've also heard about this issue. As you read the top of your little dungeon, you're like, okay, top of your adventure. We also have this other issue. Could you help us with the rats in our basement? And get them immediately onto a different quest. Like, obviously you're very competent. Can you also help us out with this other issue? Because, sometimes they're just going to banish your bad guy. And you got to be prepared for it while they're doing their monologue. And you have no way to stop them. So sometimes you just need it, or they go far afield, they get off the rails, whatever it is. So, yep. I mean, it happens. So, yeah, I'd say that's what I would consider being prepared but staying flexible. Being like, I have an adventure planned. This is the adventure. I also have some backup stuff in case they decide to not do that adventure, or they finish it really early, or they fail it somehow right off the bat, or whatever the issue is, it happens. So, it's nice to have to feel like you're not playing without a safety net below you on the high wire there. The balancing act that is being a dungeon master a lot of the times. Let's move on. What's next here? So that was 4. So manage player expectations early. This is tip number 5. Why session 0 is important. Oh, okay. Yeah, we're going to jump right into it. Establishing expectations early on helps prevent problems later. Discuss character backstories, campaign tone, and boundaries. Okay, yeah. What to cover in Session 0, discuss house rules, character creation, and what kind of game everyone wants to play. I do notice this doesn't actually tell you what Session 0 is, and if you're a new Dungeon Master who was looking for new Dungeon Master tips, you might not know what a Session 0 is. And you might look at this advice and go, I don't know what that is. So your advice is, here's a term you need to go look up. Which is not great advice, a great way to give advice. But, you know, it's in a tip format, so you gotta do what you gotta do to, like, keep it short, I guess. So, how do I feel about it? I feel like I always waffle about Session Zeros between liking them and not liking them. Which I think tells me that there's something worthwhile in that, but there's also a lot of stuff that's not worthwhile in that setup in a Session 0. And I think the only way that I would be able to drill down to that is just to run a lot of Session 0s, and hopefully you're not running a lot of Session 0s. Hopefully you're playing more D&D and not talking about D&D. Which I guess, like, when you think about Session 0 and how important it is to a successful campaign, I think the truth is that a lot of long-term D&D or Pathfinder or whatever campaigns, a lot of successful long-term campaigns come down to commitment from everybody who's involved. I've played with a lot of great groups who couldn't keep a campaign alive. You know, sometimes it's just difficult. Either the players aren't consistent enough about showing up, or you know, the DM has to really stay committed to run a long-term campaign. And you do hear a lot about DM burnout, but I have noticed that the more stuff that I watch about DM burnout, and the more content I sort of research or consume around that, there's a lot of things. I think there's a lot of blurring between DM burnout and DMs getting bored with their campaign. And those are not the same thing. Those are two very different things. And I think it's really hard for DMs to stay committed to a campaign. I think a lot of DMs, most DMs, get bored with their campaign at some point. Where they feel, right, you feel like you're stuck in a rut. And you're just kind of like plodding through the sessions, and the players are going to do the player thing, and then I'm going to do the DM thing, and, you know, it kind of loses that luster, and you're like, ah, but new shiny campaign, ooh, like, it has magic. It's new, and it's fresh, and it's novel. And so then you're like, well, maybe I scrap this campaign and run the other one. Because, you know, that's an issue for the Dungeon Masters have to deal with. That you will probably have to deal with as a Dungeon Master. If you want to run long campaigns. And if you don't want to run long campaigns, we don't sometimes talk about that. That's okay. You don't have to run a level 1 to 20 campaign. In fact, you probably shouldn't try to do that. The amount of the success ratio on running a full level 1 to 20 campaign is very small. It's very thin. That's a very thin margin that you're giving yourself, and it takes a lot of commitment from everybody involved. I think I've only played one full level 1 to 20 campaign. I didn't run it. I played in it. Because I wouldn't try to run it. I'm not that interested in high level D&D. When the math, and that's not just a 5e problem, that's an all D&D problem. Where things get real wonky and characters get super powerful, and it's an issue. Because I think so the DM's commitment is always an issue, and the DM burnout is also an issue. I think there's also the players have to be invested because it's a collective game, and so they have to be more invested in the collective aspect of the game than their own character, if that makes sense. Because you can get bored of your character, and now if you don't want to play your character and you don't want to show up to sessions, and then the campaign kind of falls apart, and then you're like, no, maybe I kill this day off, maybe I bring in a different PC, and then you get into sort of like Theseus ship sort of situation. It's like, if we're running a campaign with none of the original party members in it, is it still the same campaign that we're running? And why are we trying to make it the same campaign if it's not? So, things to think about, yes. So, I just don't think, I don't think Session 0 is important to focus on as a new Dungeon Master. I think it's probably the easiest way to talk about my feelings about it. And sort of like, as I noticed sort of earlier in the prep sort of thing, is to focus on one-shots and like those short adventures. And work on that rather than those super long-term campaigns. Which I think is really kind of what we're talking about when we're talking about player expectations, because the expectations for a one-shot is basically nothing, right? We're going to sit down, we're going to play 3 to 4 hours of D&D, and we'll be done, and we'll retire these characters and never use them again. Right? So whatever happens, if my character gets their arm blown off, if they, their entire family dies, if they murder all the townspeople, who cares? We're never going to play these characters again. There's no need for those sort of expectations for the most part, besides sort of like safety stuff. But so as a new DM, I don't think it's important to focus on the Session 0 and run those short adventures, because an online survey from 2021, I think it's by Merrick, if I remember correctly. And pretty, I mean, it's not like a full study, but it is an impromptu large survey. Revealed that the average sort of D&D campaign length is about 6 sessions. So I'd rather spend, especially as a new, even as an experienced Dungeon Master, but certainly as a new Dungeon Master, I'd rather play more D&D with my group than spend 1/6 of our time talking about the future D&D we're gonna play. We should just be playing D&D more. That's my thought about it. Especially if you're not focused on trying to really run a long campaign, because that's really the only reason you would ever need a Session 0. You don't need it for short stuff. And I feel like the best campaigns, this has been my experience, are the ones that kind of just organically happen. Like one example that me and a gaming group I was in, we had a lot of fun with, is we were actually trying out Pathfinder 2 is what we were doing. We were trying out Pathfinder 2. And we got our group very low level. I think we were first level. No, we might have been like 3rd level or something like that. Low level. Not very powerful. We got ambushed by goblins in some high grass, and they murdered the crap out of us. And that was really early, like we talked about. I was just talking about, what do you do when you have those kind of like, oh crap moments as a Dungeon Master, and be like, oh, what are we gonna do? Like, that was like the first encounter of the game, and we died. It's the classic Kragmaw hideout goblin ambush. And all the PCs are dead. Okay, what do we do now? So that's kind of a campaign non-starter, right? But what ended up happening is, we kind of talked about it, you know, it was us not being familiar with the rules, as well as people not being very good party members too. Like, not helping people with death saves and just watching them die. But I think what we decided after a few minutes of conversation, we were just kind of like, can we just, like, goblins now a player race, can we play these goblins that killed us? So that's what we did, and then we ran a campaign. We ran a couple of adventures with them. I don't know, we played maybe 6 sessions, yeah, something like that. Maybe longer than that, maybe 8 sessions. And we ran some sessions where we played as the boys, who were these insane goblins, this insane goblin crew, who were part of a larger sort of goblin monster community. We were going on missions for our goblin, like, chief, and it was silly, fighting adventurers and stuff. It was a lot of fun, but it was incredibly organic. I can't imagine that the campaign we were going to play with those original characters could anyway be more fun than playing as the boys, because the boys were a ton of fun. So what I want to do is sort of like, as a new Dungeon Master, I think trying to capture that moment, that bottle, that lightning, is really important. Or a really good way to sort of be successful as a Dungeon Master. So I'd have like a 3-step process, or I have a 3-step process for kind of doing that. So the first one is run, not necessarily like a one and done, like a one shot as an encapsulated adventure, a standalone adventure with its own characters, but not a 1 session one. Try to run a 2 to session 3 adventure for just random characters. Like, we're gonna run like a 2 or 3 shot. You guys make some characters. At the end of that adventure, ask if the people like their PCs. Do you want to play them more? Do you want to continue playing them? If somebody's like, actually, I don't really like this character, then you're like, okay, great. Then you return to step 1. You repeat the process until the players decide they want to continue on with a particular group of characters. Until they get a group of characters that feel like they mesh really well. So until, and here's the important part, is like, until you get that buy-in from the players, don't do any campaign work. Because there's no point in prepping the campaign if you don't know if they're ready to be in the campaign yet. So you're gonna want to do it. If you're like me, you're gonna want to do that, and you can't. Don't. Don't. Save all that stuff up for when you actually need it. Like, write down all the good juices, like all the good stuff. Like, put it in your new adventures that you're making, and do all that stuff. Like, don't sit on fun things, but don't prep for a campaign that you don't know is going to be a campaign yet. And I think that this will also help burn through that sort of common player desire to constantly try out new PCs. Right? Especially if you're playing with people who are new to the game, they kind of want to get a feel for what all the classes are and all that kind of stuff. And you can let them sort of shuffle through that until they're like, I actually really want to play a higher level, like I don't know, sorcerer, because ideally you're going to be running these small adventures at relatively low levels, so that way you can build a campaign with them if you want to. But they might be like, I really like the sorcerer class. I'd really like to see what 5th level of this draconic sorcerer line looks like. I really want to check out this ability. Oh, so I'm hearing that you want to play this character more. Yes, I do. All right, well, why don't you bring them to the next adventure, do a little repeat, and then we'll see if other people want to keep playing their characters. And before you know it, those no's, after you end the adventure, turn into yeses. And when they say yes, you ask each player to submit like one thing they want in a campaign and one thing they don't want in a campaign. And you can sort of like compile those answers together to figure out what you want to build a campaign, what you want to focus a campaign around, and what you don't want to focus a campaign around, so everybody kind of gets what they want. And then you make an elevator pitch for that, like, hey, this is the sort of the campaign that I'm thinking about running. And then you toss it back to them, and here are the homebrew rules I kind of want to use, etc., those sorts of things. And this is like, oh, but I think in this setting I don't want anybody to be, I mean, you're going to know what the characters are already, I guess. You don't have to be, like, no dwarves, because what if there's already a dwarf in the party? But it sort of give them the things that they need, provide them a little bit of setting information, just enough so they'll be able to create some PC backstories. And then I also, I have a list of sort of like, I think there's like 7 questions in it. Things that I use to sort of like build characters, or when I'm running campaigns that I might ask the players to complete. And it's just a few questions about sort of like their backstory. And they can write backstory, or they can just answer the questions, and we'll just kind of figure it out together. That way it doesn't be like, well, you better write me a 10-page backstory. Okay, first, no DM wants a 10-page backstory. You're going to write me a 1-page... I don't feel like most DMs want a 1-page backstory, and I will definitely write over a 1-page backstory. For a good character. For a character I really want to play. But yeah, the expectation is that you're going to do some you're going to have some amount of backstory that will come into play during your campaign. That is prepared to come into a play in a campaign. Yeah, that's tip 5. So yeah, I mean, I feel like it's pretty straightforward, and this thing in player expectations doesn't really cover anything like safety tools, and safety tools should definitely be part of this discussion. But it also doesn't cover like figuring out what the players want and what their expectations are. It just says to establish them. Okay. So not a lot of how to do things for the tips, which is not super useful for a new DM. I am going to take a quick bio break for a second, and then we'll continue on with tip number 6. So stay there. Be right back. Just a second. All right, we're back. So let's go ahead with tip 6. Encourage player roleplay and engagement. Why roleplaying and engagement matter? Roleplay deepens players' connections to the characters and enhances the immersive experience. It makes the game more collaborative and engaging, enriching both individual character development and the overall world building. Okay. and then it's a little purple prose, but how to foster roleplay and player interaction. Ask players about their characters' motivations, backstories, and goals to encourage deeper engagement. Offer opportunities for characters to make meaningful choices, interact with NPCs, and face moral dilemmas. Create moments for characters to shine, such as skill challenges or personal story arcs. I'm not sure that those things are the same thing. And create a comfortable environment. Ensure all players feel welcome and supported in expressing their characters, helping to create an inclusive and engaging atmosphere at the table. Okay. It's, Now, how do I feel about that? I think I would replace encourage with facilitate. Yeah, because I think that encourage can kind of maybe come across like you pushing people to roleplay, and nothing's going to make somebody feel uncomfortable about roleplay probably faster than being like, roleplay, do roleplay now. Like, no, I'm good, thank you. I do think just it's funny overall, and this is more of a meta kind of humor, I guess. I think it's funny that it's weird that you need to. There's a feeling that you need to tell people to roleplay in a role-playing game. It's very interesting. It's like the only game in which you do that. It's like you don't have to tell people to shoot people in like a FPS game, like a first-person shooter game, or like a boomer shooter. Like, yeah, of course you shoot things. That's what the game's about. So it is funny. Then it's just funny. Let's move on. The biggest issue, I think, is that roleplay is a very liquid term. It means different things to different people. It's not very concrete. It's not very strong. It doesn't have a very strong identity as to what it's meant when you say roleplay. Which I think is the bigger issue, and why this is the sort of thing that kind of comes up a lot. I think if you really want to encourage player roleplay and engagement, I mean, you can ask players about their motivations and backstories and goals. Yeah, yeah, and you can provide opportunities, right? You facilitate those things. Correct. But as far as like how to do that, I think first I'd say get familiar with like the player types, archetypes. That's like the storyteller, explorer, thinker, power gamer, slayer, watcher or observer, actor. I think that's most of them. There's like 7 of them, right? I think I hit them all. I'm probably missing one. But I don't know what that is off the top of my head. But I think that's all. Anyways, I would say get familiar with those, and being able to identify them in your players. That's just a useful DM tool to have, to be able to look at a player and play with them for a little bit and be like, okay, I think you are your primary sort of like player type. The way that you enjoy the game the most is probably these 2 or 3 archetypes, is what's important to you. And so the best groups usually have very complementary player types. Like storytellers and actors and explorers kind of all fit together sometimes. Things like those, and where you can have a more themed game or campaign, if that makes sense, when you have a number of complementary types in your group. So yeah, I'd say first get familiar with those. I personally, for myself, favor explorer, the storyteller, and the thinker or problem solver roles, and that's usually the play that I like to engage in the most. So I like to go explore things and learn things about the world. I like to um, facilitate and play my role, not specifically my character as like an actor would, but more like as a facet of a collaborative story that we're all putting together. From the storyteller stuff, and then from the sort of problem solver aspect, is like the way that I play D&D now as a player is that I'm often trying not to do combats often. If that makes sense. I play like little games with myself sometimes. So the first one is, can I not do combat about this? How can I avoid combat? That's a weird game that sometimes I play. And the second one is, how much information can I get? How much stuff can I do without having to roll a die? If I just ask for stuff, or ask if I could do something, how much can I do without actually having to make up a die and roll it? Because I think, and that's a good player skill, I think in general, is to just ask questions and just try to do things and wait for the dungeon master to assign what type of roll needs to be made, if any type of roll needs to be made, rather than being like, can I make a perception check, or can I make an insight check, and then the DM has to be like, okay, what are you trying to accomplish, what are you trying to do? So just being like, I am trying to do a thing, can I do a thing? Yes. Usually the answer is just yes. Yeah. Like, instead of being like, can I roll an investigation roll, I'd be like, I take a look at the desk and rifle through the drawers and see if there's anything worth looking at. And sometimes the dungeon master will be like, yeah, make an investigation check. Or sometimes they'll be like, yep, you find the note that's in the desk, no roll required. You find the note. Or sometimes they'll be like, and you notice that there's like a false bottom, or that something weird's there's something weird with the drawer. And then that'll spark off like the investigation check for something to like look deeper into something. But you're going to get a lot of that sort of basic level knowledge for free. Be able to do a lot of basic things for free, just by asking, just by trying to do stuff and trying to look for things. So yeah, I know that was a pretty big tangent, but that's what I like to do in the game. So what I'm trying to do by talking about that is tell you that's what's fun for me. And so you excuse me, as a dungeon master, if you know that that's fun for me, you can see, okay, here are the things that I can put out to bring out your specific fun in the game. These are the things that you're going to try to engage with the game, so I'm going to make sure there's stuff there for you to engage with for that. And also, I know how you can create issues for the game. If you might be creating issues for the group of players because you're actively trying to avoid combat in those situations, and coming up with schemes and plays and all sorts of hijinks to avoid having combats. And if you have, some slayers and power gamers in your group, and they're like, I want to get in a fight, and you're keeping us from getting in fights, right? That can be attention. So you can see how that can create issues both in the game and for players like at the table. And maybe you like to run combats as a dungeon master, and you're like, please just fight something. Stop trying to go around them. So yeah, these are things you got to deal with. So that's sort of the first, is get familiar with the player types and kind of know how to use them and the sort of issues they can cause. Instigator, that's the last one I didn't think about. The one who's always causing problems, the instigator. But also the person who always keeps the party from not getting stuck on something, because they always make something happen. They get to a puzzle and they're like, I can't figure out the puzzle. It doesn't seem like we can figure out the puzzle. Let's go do something else, or try to break the door, or do something else, right? They're going to move on and try something else. They're not going to stick around and just be stuck. So, right, both have good and problematic facets that you deal with as Dungeon Master. And the more that you understand them and you can smooth over them, the better your games will be. That's practical advice. Ba-boom, there you go. The second one, so the first one is understanding player types and how to use them. The second is, don't force yourself to run a game you hate, which seems like that would be very common knowledge, but not often. Usually the advice is just like, you have to be able to find a group in a game that's where everybody's going to have fun. But for a lot of people, depending if you have people to play D&D with or you don't, you might only have a couple groups of D&D, and you only get 2 flavors of D&D, and if neither of those are your flavor of D&D, but there's no other D&D, do you play in it? Do you run it? Probably. Right, unfortunately the answer is probably. Like, we know that bad D&D is worse than no D&D, but it's hard when you're starved for D&D. Any junk food looks good when you're starving. But don't force yourself to run a game that you hate. Like, for example, I tried to run a campaign for a group of Power Gamers and Slayers. We didn't have a lot of fun. It didn't make it a lot of sessions. And, well, I should say, I was having a fine time. But I was not giving them what they wanted in the game. They just wanted hardcore tactical combat, almost all session, every session. These are specifically, we were playing 5th edition, but these were specifically 4th edition players. And they were still very much in that 4th edition mentality as players. It'd be like, everything's tactical, grid mapped, minis, combat optimization, tactical decisions. That's the game, and everything else is just filler. And I was not providing that to them. I was giving them fights, sure, but I was generally playing theater of the mind. I was doing stuff like I always do in fights, where people are doing things that are not on your character sheet. Where I'm like, oh, this person's holding this person hostage. They're holding a knife to their neck. Are you going to attack them? Because if we're playing by the rules, unless you kill them, they're gonna kill this person. They're gonna kill this commoner person. They're definitely gonna do enough damage to kill them with their dagger, like, at their neck. So are you gonna attack them? And that was not a situation they were interested in. That's the sort of thing they weren't interested in exploring in D&D. They were like, no, I just want to hit the guy with the sword and make the hit points go down. I want to use my cool abilities and make the bad guys die. I was like, oh, okay. Yeah, we're not going to get... Our campaign is not going to work. And it didn't, and we parted ways. And I don't play with those people anymore. I don't dislike them. They don't dislike me. We just don't play together anymore. We're like, our styles do not match. And as somebody who came very much out of... Played a lot of 4th edition, was in that mind for a long time. Because that is a huge part of 4th edition. It's primarily a tactical combat game with long combats. Which, in and of itself, is fun. But I want my games to be more than that. Right, that's one of the 3 pillars. Right, you guys have all these utility powers and social powers. Do you want to use any of those? Nope, we just want more combats. And so, you don't want to keep forcing yourself to run a game that you hate. Right, you're not going to have fun. And if you're not going to have fun prepping for the game and running the game, then guess what? The game's not going to be fun. So don't do that. So I think, like, if you think backstory is important to the game, and if you're coming at it from that, as an example, like, if you think backstories are important to the game you're trying to run, and one or more players haven't sent you any backstory information after you've, maybe prodded them like 2 times, they're probably not going to be invested in your game. Is that going to be a problem for you as a dungeon master? That your players, they're bringing characters that don't have backstory, they're not really wanting to explore the internal workings of that character or have things that are personal to that character. Is that going to be a deal breaker for your game? I don't know. Is it for you? It's usually not for mine. Usually I'm like, okay, you want to play the game. I respect that you want to play the game, and that's all you want to do. These other people want to engage in some backstory stuff. If you change your mind, that's great. Let me know, and we can do a backstory, and you can have a personal arc and focus on that stuff. If not, we're going to focus on that stuff, and you'll get all the fighting and pillaging and cool thief stuff or whatever you want out of the game. We'll figure out how to get you your thing. And you just move on from there. Like, avoiding combat as a way to challenge yourself to think outside the box, or as a way to roleplay as a character with infinite lives, or, yeah, it's a little bit of both. It's, because I think it's very easy, I know we're backtracking, but that's fine. I'm happy to talk about it. It is a little weird, I understand. It's not necessarily to challenge, I mean, it's more that violence is always the default answer to any question in D&D. When you have a character sheet and you look down the character sheet and most of it's about how to kill stuff, guess what your answer, you are a mallet and every situation looks like a nail. So it's trying to get me out of that mentality. And it is nice it does role play as a character who is like not passé about violence. It adds a new level of dimension to the game that I really enjoy. Like a character who doesn't particularly want to kill people or creatures, doesn't really want to do that, and they will do that if that's what needs to be done, but are oftentimes looking for other solutions that isn't just, stacks of bodies. It's just a different way to play the game. It's really changed how I play the game, and I really enjoy it a lot more. It's a lot being careful and trying to avoid combats and sneaking around. Like, it's also understanding the objective of what you're trying to do as a party and a player character. Like, okay, our objective is to grab, let's say, the hostage from the Goblin Cave. Whatever. Regular old adventure. So you're like, okay, so our goal is to bring somebody back. So our goal is not to kill the monsters. So can we just go get them? Can we negotiate for their release? Can we just sneak in and take them? Do a very sort of like tactical infiltration, and maybe we have to kill a couple of guards who are wandering the halls, but we don't just, try to completely annihilate a population of creatures in a dungeon, in a cave system. It's just a different way to play. So let's jump back. Where was it? So step 1, get familiar with the player types, archetypes. The second part is don't force yourself to run a game you hate. There's a third part that I wanted to talk about. What was that? So one of the privileges of being a dungeon master is you get to kind of be the first among equals at the table. Right? All the players are equal at the table, but you're a little more equal than the rest. Let's be honest, because you're taking on more responsibility, so you should get a little bit more privilege. That's my thought on it. If you're willing to do like homework for your fun game time with friends, and nobody else is doing that, I think you get a little bit more say. That's just my feeling about it. It's like you get more say than most people when it comes to the game that you want to run and the people you want to run it for. It is my way or the highway, but like, don't be a dick about it, right? Like, you can be like, look, I don't think this is going to work out. I don't think that our play styles are aligning, and you exit somebody, because that's the best thing that you can kind of do. If you're going to have to spend most of your time engaging with the campaign, I think you need to enjoy it as much or more than your players. That's sort of how I try to come at sort of game mastering. If I got to do more work about this stuff, I should at least be the one who's definitely going to enjoy it more than I feel like everybody else. But yes, I also want them to have fun. I want my friends and players to have fun too. It's not just for me. But it is being like, if we're going to spend that time together, I feel like a larger share of the pie when it comes to having a say in that. And I'd say don't suffer, bad players, which I think usually it's not like, I mean, every once in a while it's that guy, and you know who that guy is. But most of the time, a bad player is just somebody that's a poor match for the game that you're running, or the group of friends that you have, or you as a DM. And you're just like, we are just a poor match. Like, you want totally different things than I want. Just like I was trying to run a game for Slayers and Power Gamers, and I was like, we are just not gonna see eye to eye on stuff. We're not gonna get. I don't think we're gonna get to a place where we're all gonna be happy in the game that's happening. So, when you have a bad player, you try to exit them from the group as quickly as possible once you decide that, like, hey, it's not going to work. And that doesn't have to be, like, some sort of adjudication you make. You can always, like, try to be like, hey, can you try to do more of this and this for the group? We're really interested in having this sort of mode of play, and we need you to either kind of, like, get on board, or if you're not going to get on board, then it's time to maybe move groups. We're not going to think. Currently, what's happening right now is not working. And we need a better fit, or we're going to need to find another group. And I guess we'll have to find another player. If we want to. So, yeah, exit bad players as fast as you can. Don't let them hang around. People who are a bad match. Again, they're not bad most of the time. You're the DM, so you are an in-demand commodity. It's important to remember as a dungeon master, and like, don't let the power get to you because of this. But because of scarcity, you are in demand. And it is important to remember that you can easily find another group most of the time. And you can especially find another group if you're willing to share at least some of the, like, dungeon master duties. That's usually what anybody's looking for in a new player for the group. Especially for the dungeon master, because usually, right, you have the one person in the group who's probably the forever DM. Like, please, every once in a while, can you please run an adventure? I just want to play. Or you get the person who's like, no, actually, I just like being a dungeon master more than I like playing the game. But if you are willing to share at least some, not even all of it necessarily, but at least. There's always groups that are looking for a DM, which I feel is weird. Like a fully formed group of friends who are like, we need a DM. Will you DM for us? That's such a weird ask. Or at least it is to me. But remember that you are an in-demand commodity. You can find another group if you have multiple bad players. Like, if you are not gelling with the group. Like, I didn't feel bad about that group breakup with the Power Gamers and Slayers. I was like, I can find another game. If I'm willing to run, I'm not going to have any issues finding a game. And I don't think of myself this way. I don't think I'm that guy, so I usually don't have problems finding games. You treat people nice, you show up, you have fun. Pretty easy player to get along with most of the time. But yeah, I mean, that's sort of what I do, anyways. That would be sort of my sort of jump at it. And creating a comfortable environment. I don't think I said that part, did I? Ensuring all players feel welcome and supported in expressing their characters, helping to create an inclusive and engaging atmosphere at the table. And I'm not sure it's a tip. And be like, have good friends. Is your tip have good friends? Have a good group of friends. A good group of players. Oh, thanks. Again, extremely useful tip. Thanks. So ChatGPT. Yeah. So I mean, I think that's what we're coming to expect, is that it's going to give you the idea of some tips, but not really a lot of like good, actionable new dungeon master. This is how you get better at being a dungeon master. So I think this is going to be a kind of an across the board failure, unfortunately. I think, but let's press on. There's still like ideas in here that are good that I'm trying to expand on. So if you're a new dungeon master and you are watching this, hopefully you're getting something out of this. If so, make sure and let me know. I'd love to know. And and if you have any questions, what those questions are, and how we can, if you want a specific like topic covered, we can maybe do that on the channel if there's enough people who kind of want that. You know, let me know what you think you need, and we'll try to figure out a way to get it to you. That's about the best I can do. So let's move on to tip number 7. From ChatGPT says, learn to improvise. Oh. Yeah. Agreed. It's more a survival thing, though. It's like you're gonna have to learn how to do it. It's not really a tip, it's survival. You will have to do this. Why improvisation is key for new DMs. Players may take the story in unexpected directions. Always do. Being able to improvise keeps the game flowing. It definitely does that. How to improve improvisation. Practice making quick decisions. Yeah, I'd agree with that. If in doubt, make a simple call and move on. Use generic NPCs or locations to fill in gaps when needed. Locations is interesting. Generic NPCs are like name lists and stuff like that is pretty common. Or a couple generic sort of like stat blocks that you might keep in the back pocket as DM when you just need a warm body to know to have some stats for something. So yeah, I think I would agree with that. I'm not sure how much of it's super actionable, but I definitely agree with it. It does feel like a retread of, what was it? Tip 3? Tip 4. Yeah, be prepared but stay flexible. I mean, we are kind of just saying the same thing over again. With somehow less practical information in this tip, so that's interesting. So we are starting to see the chinks in the armor, the flaws in the diamond of ChatGPT's advice. I think it's less learning to improvise and more learning what you specifically don't need to prep, if that makes sense. Because improvisation, as a dungeon master at its core, is just the lack of prep material. It's just stuff that you need to come up with because you don't have anything prepped for it. So I think it's important if you want to get better, because I mean, yeah, you could take an improv class if you want to go that route and do stuff like that. Like, I think, yes, that could work. I don't know. I've never taken an improv class. But I assume that would have some helpful skills in it, but I don't know any just like improv exercise. I mean, there's lots of improv exercises. I just don't know any of them. So you could look those up and try to work on that with D&D stuff. That would be probably useful. Maybe. I have no idea actually, but I think it would be useful. My assumption is that it would be useful. But one thing I do know works is to review your prep and session notes after each game session. That's worked for me, at least. It's because if I have like my prep notes and I have the notes that I took during the session, and I sit down at the end of each session, look at, specifically I'm looking for things like I didn't use, like prep that didn't come up. And I feel like if you do this session after session, you'll start to find like trends, being like, there's like this location information that I always prep, but rarely gets used. Maybe I don't need to prep that. And so you kind of cut away the prep, because I think especially as a new dungeon master, the inclination is to way over prep. So if you do your classic over prepping, and then you actually come back and look at what you actually used, and you slowly start trying to cut out things that you aren't using, that don't come up often enough, or are in depth enough that you feel like it needs to be prepped, and you're going to feel a little bit easier about improvising those things, I feel like, over time, because they're obviously not super consequential for your game. So yeah, and then you just kind of cut from that session prep, and eventually you'll get down to, I know I said that earlier, like the 2-page prep for a number of sessions of D&D, multiple sessions of D&D is like, yeah, because all I'm gonna need, we talked about the adventure design, is like I can answer those questions, I know what's going on here, I have some bad guys, I have some places to go, I have some obstacles and tricks and traps and stuff, and yeah, then I just kind of like toss the players in there and be like, hey, go do your stuff. Go do whatever you're gonna do. You know what you're supposed to be doing, whether you choose to do that or not is up to you. And how you do that is up to you. So another thing I'd look at is how often are you thrown off balance by a maybe some sort of like specific player action or question that seems like it always kind of catches you off guard. Yeah, and then sort of how can you integrate addressing that as part of your prep? Because that's one of the things you're going to be like, anything that kind of gives you that deer in the headlights look. That's the one that where you're like, your brain just kind of pauses when it happens, and you're like, I don't know what to do. Those are the things that maybe you should start integrating into your prep. So it's just sort of like this constant retooling of taking things out of your prep and adding things into your prep. There's no like one and done, and this will always be the way you do your session prep. That isn't, at least that hasn't been my experience with it. But you know, your mileage may vary. So, but I'd say give it a try at least. And then I would compile any sort of useful resources into a DM binder. So you have those things sort of like on hand every session to kind of like keep it snappy, keep it everything together. And every DM binder is like completely customized specifically to your needs when running games. So my DM binder is not going to look like your DM binder, who's not going to look like your DM binder, who's not going to look like your DM binder. They're all going to look different. And they should, because it's your specific personalized resources you need to run the game. And to feel confident in doing that improvisation. Like for me, that's like a list of 1D100 just people. Primarily it's by jobs, and there's more than 100 on the list for sure. Basically every selection has multiple selections in it. If I need to know who some random person is, or if they ask, you know, let's say I run an adventure, we're running like a murder mystery thing, and they're like, oh no, we made it, there's a second victim. And they're like, and they're investigating the victim, and they're like, well, who is the victim, like what did they do for a job? Maybe we need to check out like their place of employment. And I might be like, I did not think to prep that. That is not a question I was prepared for. I might pick up my D100 and roll it and look at my 100 job thing table and be like, okay, this person is a tailor. Oh, so they run like a tailor shop. Interesting. So maybe that would be useful for your binder. Maybe it won't be. The only way to know that is by sort of getting into situations where you figure out that you need that stuff, unfortunately. Like I said, it's a lot of learning as you do. Unfortunately, there's only so much you can sort of prepare yourself for first contact with DMing, and then sort of everything after that is just sort of learning by doing. So, I guess my real advice would be like, just go do it. Overall, just go do it. Life's gonna be easier if you just go do it. Yeah, and that kind of broaches right into our tip number 8, I guess. That's a good unintentional segue. Great job, me. Don't be afraid to make mistakes. Yes, you can't be afraid to make mistakes, because you're gonna make mistakes. You're gonna make a lot of them, and you're gonna do it all the time. Why it's okay to make mistakes. Every DM makes mistakes, especially when starting out. This is all very true. The goal is to have fun and learn from each session. Okay, yeah, sure. Why not? How to handle mistakes. Acknowledge them and move on. If necessary, correct things later during the session or at the start of the next one. I feel like our tips are getting thinner and thinner as we go on. Like, there's just not a lot of meat on those bones, huh? I feel like I have a distinct feeling that tip 8 should be really more like, should be higher in the mix. It should be like tip 3. Like, hey, don't be worried about making mistakes, because that's an early lesson you got to figure out is if you're going to be a successful DM. It's like, you're going to make mistakes and it's okay, and you just kind of move on. So I'd say, yeah, as far as like a mentality that's useful for being a DM, especially a new DM, is that sort of, it kind of comes from software development, that fail fast mentality. Be like, let's make as many mistakes as we can as quickly as we can, because the quicker we make the mistakes, the quicker we fix mistakes. We discover the mistakes and we fix them, which is just sort of like, instead of trying to be perfect, just trying to figure out how you're not perfect and change that to, I mean, you're never going to be perfect, but become more perfect as much as you can as a dungeon master. So yeah, so how do you fail fast as a dungeon master? You run games. You run a lot of games. That's the easiest way to do it. I mean, we said run those like one shots, those short adventures, like just get in the chair and just go. It's sort of like getting better at the sport. It's like the only way to get better at the sport is by playing the sport or playing the game. Like, you just kind of have to do it. And I think there's another little like adage. I don't know if we would call it an adage for dungeon masters. That's kind of useful as sort of like a thought exercise. Be like, if you haven't started dungeon mastering, or actually, I guess it doesn't really matter. At this point, right now, is the worst dungeon master that you'll ever be. And by that, we mean is that right now, from now on, any experience you get is just going to make you a better dungeon master. So you're going to make mistakes, and it's okay. Screw-ups are very natural. They're very commonplace. If you play D&D, you've probably made mistakes as players and as the dungeon master, or been with the dungeon master who made a mistake that you're going to have to retcon or figure out or gloss over or whatever. So you want to get real Bob Ross about it. You're like, there's no mistakes. There's just happy little accidents. So yeah, the screw-ups will be as big as you let them be, kind of. If you act like they're not a big deal, they probably won't be a big deal. Yeah, and I say it from plenty of experience. I don't think I've ever run an adventure I haven't screwed up at least some part of. Even ones that I create. Often ones I create. I'm like, crap, I forgot about that trap. Or, oh, right. This mechanic that I made up was supposed to work completely differently. Oh, well. Whoops. Yeah, so, I mean, like, there's no amount of being a dungeon master that you're going to reach sort of, like, dungeon master nirvana perfection. That's not going to happen. You're going to screw things up. Next game, next year, next decade, however long you play the game, you're going to keep screwing things up. So the best advice, I think, is like, if you keep things flexible with that adventure design and how you run the game, if you try to be flexible, you'll be able to massage the adventure, the game session around any sort of blemishes, any sort of screw-ups that you make most of the time. Every once in a while, you're going to make a big mistake, or you're going to have a real kind of dodgy adjudication that people, the group's not going to be happy about, or that you just screw up. And you're going to discuss it at the end of the session, and you're going to get the group's temperature on, like, hey, so that didn't go great, so how do we want to address sort of similar situations in the future so we don't do this again. I think that's probably the more practical advice is, don't worry about screwing things up, because you're going to screw things up, and the more things you screw up, the more opportunities you're going to have to do things to not screw up, basically. And then let's move on to tip number 9, which is keep the pace moving. Okay, we kind of already touched on pacing a little bit. I also think it's weird to bring up pacing for new Dungeon Master. I don't feel like that's a new Dungeon Master thing. Let's read, though. Let's give ChatGPT its chance to change my mind. Let's try it. Why pacing matters. Too much downtime or long pauses between actions can lose players' attention. Yeah. How to keep things moving. Be mindful of the flow of the game. Don't let battles or conversations drag on too long. Keep things interesting by introducing new developments. Okay. Yes and no. Yes, I agree. No, I don't. I also don't agree. Yeah, so the AI did already touch on this. What is that tip 2? Yeah, how to keep the game flowing. So again, it's kind of retreading some of the same stuff again. And again, pacing is like improvisation. It's really hard to teach pacing. Yeah, I'm not sure you can really teach somebody how to pace. It's more of a... It feels like an artsy kind of thing. Like it's kind of like a music thing. It's like, yes, there is sort of like a statistical mathematic process that makes it work, but a lot of the times it's more like a feeling. And the only way to develop a feeling, like a gut feeling like that, is through experience. And I do think that pacing or tempo in a game is a lot more of a intermediate DM skill. I'm not sure I consider it a new... that's definitely not where I would tell a new Dungeon Master to sort of focus. Though it is important to keep your games engaging. I guess if I was going to break it down, a portion of your job as a DM is to keep the game engaging. That is a part of what you do. And that's on top of like all the other stuff that you do as Dungeon Master, which is running the game and creating adventures and monsters and whatever. You want to keep an eye on your players at the table. Like, are they engaging? Are they having fun? Is someone checked out? How can you sort of like pull them into the current scene or move focus to them next for a little while to try to make sure that they get to, that you share all the light for everybody. Everybody gets their time in the light. And all the characters get equitable focus. But tempo is very, very hard. Because it's different each game session, really. You want the game to run smoothly, for sure. But you don't want it to run too fast. So it feels like things are really running, and the players are like sprinting through encounters and through scenes. And they feel like maybe they're like missing things, or things are really being glossed over. They feel like they don't have any opportunities to like do inter-party roleplay or really look into things or try to figure out stuff on their own, or all the engaging experience of being in the game and having your character in the world. But you also don't want it to be too slow, because you don't want your players kind of standing around in a circle kicking dirt. So finding that balance is kind of difficult. I don't know. I just don't know how to, and maybe that's a failing on my part. I don't know how to explain just getting in the groove, really. I guess try using, one of the things I do is I use more shorter combat encounters. I know I said many times that I really try to hit a sweet spot around 3 rounds of combat. That seems to be kind of the sweet spot, at least for me. Because, like I said, by 3 rounds of combat, anybody who wanted to do something cool has already tried to do their cool thing. And usually by the by the end of the third round of combat, it's usually pretty clear who's gonna win the combat at that point. So I use morale and other things to sort of like reduce that common D&D combat slog, where combats take a bunch of time as much as possible, because that chews up a bunch of session time. So that way we can have plenty of time for the 2 other pillars of the game, right? A lot more exploration and a lot more social stuff. So yeah, so I run shorter but usually a higher volume of combats. You might have more combats in my games, but they're usually not particularly long. I try not to make them long. Try to make them as short as possible. Other things, minimizing choke points or like gatekeeper obstacles that bring parties to like a screeching halt if they can't overcome or bypass the challenge. Like a choke point where it's just like if you can't figure out how to get through this locked door, you're not going to be able to complete the adventure. And so the easiest way to get around sort of like a single point of failure for your entire game is to include loops and multiple routes in your dungeons and adventures with different ways for the player characters to arrive at the climax of the adventure or dungeon. So that way, if they get stymied and they can't make it through one passage, they can't get past one trap or a puzzle room or whatever it is, they can go around it and still be able to complete the adventure without dealing with that one specific challenge. Because really, ideally, I think the only sort of like only gatekeeper encounter you should really have is probably whatever the climactic encounter is. If that's your big bad evil guy or whoever it is, whoever's guarding the MacGuffin or the trap or the dark ritual or whatever it is. Like that's really the one encounter that just is going to be the single point of failure. You shouldn't have other points of failure, ideally, in your adventures or dungeons. So yeah, I would be like try to keep non-combat encounters moving forward. That'd be a good way to do that. I guess I'd say using clues, wandering monsters, any sort of like interruptibles that kind of keeps the party moving if they stall out on an obstacle. You see this happen a lot with sort of like puzzle rooms and things like that, where at some point them trying to solve the puzzle will become circular and they're not really making any headway, and that's when you're like, hey, maybe I throw them a clue, or maybe there's a wandering monster that comes by and it kind of like gets them from a place where they're just kind of stuck on one obstacle to maybe moving on to a different obstacle or trying something else, and if need be come back to that obstacle once they've done something else, and maybe that will spur them to, maybe they can find some new information, get some of those tasty clues, secrets, and be able to come back and take on the puzzle, or just go around the puzzle. If you've made those loops, right, then you're gonna be able to do that too. Other things, cut from the middle. That's probably an easy one. If you're in a time crunch, if you're running a one shot or whatever, you're trying to get to whatever specific thing that you're trying to get to in the session for like the end of the session. Cut from the middle, not from the end. So you always want to have that climax. So you want to start pulling stuff from encounters and traps and stuff from the middle of the adventures. That way you can get the full ending experience of the adventure, the payoff for the adventure, and you're not cutting that, because that's what you want to avoid cutting. That'll make your games much better. I sometimes actually put timestamps in my prep notes, especially if I'm running like a one shot. If you're running a one shot, especially if you're running in a like a convention or a rented room or any sort of space, like a public space like that, or it's a situation where you can't split it into two sessions because the players won't be there, whatever the case is. It's helpful for me to have those timestamps on there, because then I can look like when they're about to go on to, or they finish an encounter, I can like look at the time note. Am I behind? Maybe I cut this encounter, and we'll move on to the next one, because I need to cut to make sure that I hit the timeline right, which is pretty easy to do. I mean, you know how long you're gonna play generally, and you know what you've prepped, so you put some timestamps in there. It's simple division, and then you just put some timestamps in there, and that'll give you an idea. Yeah, use random encounters, obstacles and asides, other simple content techniques to play for time, because sometimes you have the opposite issue. Sometimes you're not cutting, you need to pad time, because like the wizard example, or the cleric banishment example, it's like sometimes the players do something really smart or really clever, or circumvent a challenge in a way that you thought was going to take them a long time, and it didn't. and they are very far ahead, and you're like, well, they're going to be done like an hour and a half early. You might want to pad that session if you want to. You don't have to, but you can. You can be like, oh, well, here's some wandering monsters, or here's a weird clue you find that you might want to investigate, or anything like that. Maybe there's a random NPC in the adventure that you throw in there that they can talk to and get some information out of, or can be a thorn in their side for a little bit. Very, very simple stuff like that. Just to kind of give them a little bit more content in between those sort of like tentpole encounters. And you can kind of like stretch the time out if you need to. And then obviously you cut where you need to cut. Yep, man. I think that's before everything. I guess the last thing that I would say is that you really, ideally as a Dungeon Master, you want to try to end sessions on either rising or falling tension. Not at peaks and valleys. So, right, you don't cut, you try not to cut in the middle of combat, right? That would be the peak. But it's also can be hard to get back into the game if you come out of it in a valley where it's like, oh, and then you guys did some downtime and you're like in that sort of space between adventures. It can be hard to start off sessions like that, so try not to do that. Try not to end sessions there. So you can, like, right before or right after looting challenges, like looting a tentpole challenge, can be a good place. It's probably an ideal place. It doesn't stop basically right before you roll initiative or right after you've killed the bad guys, but you haven't looted the bodies yet. So that way, your players are excited to come back next time to find out all the juicy loot that they're going to get from those, dead hobgoblins or whatever you're fighting. Yeah, I mean, that's it from pacing, I think. Again, not something that I don't think any of those skills particularly new Dungeon Master oriented. I think that's more of an intermediate, that's more of an advanced, I consider that more of an advanced topic. I don't think that that's something you need to concern yourself a lot with as a new Dungeon Master. That's a thing you start to concern yourself with once you're good at, like, I know how to make an adventure, I know how to run the game. Like the actual doing of it. Then you can start being like, okay, how do I make the game that I do run better? And how do I make the adventures that I prep better? But you know how to do the things. You need to reach that level of sort of like basic proficiency first, I think, before you need to start worrying about things like pacing. And again, as you run more adventures, especially if you run published adventures, you can look at what they've written, look at how your players are interacting and engaging or not engaging, disengaging with the content and of an adventure, and be like, how would I change this pacing? How can I change this pacing so it's better for me and for the whole table? So that can be a very useful part of running published adventure modules. Is it, again, it tells you as much what to do that's good as to what you need to do to accommodate for not good aspects of design, or bad, or a type of adventure that doesn't work for you or your group. Because sometimes that's just what it is. It's like sometimes you might run might grab a published adventure that's nothing but a hack and slasher through a dungeon, and you'd be like, there's just not like any story or anything to do in here except kill monsters. And if you have a group that's not, like, they enjoy combat, but they don't want to only do combat, you're going to have to do a little work on your side to be like, okay, what are some exploration challenges I can throw in here? What are some creatures they can talk to? What is the overall adventure? Is there any way they can accomplish what they want to do in this adventure without killing all the monsters? Because somebody might try that. If I'm playing in that game, I'm probably going to try that, because that's how I am as a player. I'll probably try not to kill them if I can avoid it. So yeah, I mean, that's all pacing. And then let's just do our last tip. Tip number 10 from the AI. Delicious ChatGPT. Use tools and resources to make life easier. Why tools can help DMs. That's a hell of a bullet point. Resources like online character sheets, encounter builders, and virtual tabletops can make running the game much easier. Essential tools, and I don't think I said that at the beginning. All this is just pulled straight from ChatGPT. I just threw it in a Google Doc, but this is all precisely as it was given to me. I did not alter any of this in any way to make it look silly. It did that all on its own. And so, virtual tabletops can make running the game much easier. Essential tools for new DMs. D&D Beyond for character sheets. Well, I failed that. Random encounter generators for improvisation. I failed that too. Initiative trackers to streamline combat. I failed at that too. I don't use any of these essential tools. What am I doing? It's terrible. I gotta get these tools. Okay. I think this is really the only tip that I'm just like a hard disagree, I guess. And not because like tools or resources aren't useful, because that's definitely not the argument for that. They certainly are useful. For new DMs, I feel like this is counterproductive advice. I think it gives off the vibe that you can't be a success at running Dungeons and Dragons or Pathfinder or Call of Cthulhu or whatever until you have the perfect suite of tools and resources at your fingertips. And that's not true. That's not true in this hobby. It's not true in any hobby or anything that you do. You don't need to wait until you have the right gear to do something. You do something with what you got, or else you just wait. And so, do you want to be thinking about being a dungeon master, or do you want to be a dungeon master? Because if you're focused on making sure that you have initiative trackers rather than running games, maybe you don't want to be a dungeon master. And that's not bad. But you maybe it's time to take a hard look and be like, do you actually want to be a dungeon master? Do you actually want to run games? Because you're going to have to run games at some point to be that. So I think from my and why I disagree is I want prospective DMs to spend their time running games. That's what I want you to do. I want you to run games. I want you to have fun. And I want you to get better at running games through the process of running games. And not feeling that you can't, like, you're not qualified to run a session of D&D unless you know Roll20 inside and out, or you have a tool to manage every aspect of the game. Like I said, I don't have a D&D Beyond subscription. I don't like the business model. I don't have a random encounter generator. I mean, I have some random encounter tables, and I make them for adventures. I mean, I've got Kobold Club, right? I guess that's not true. That's not true. I do actually use Kobold Fight Club. Specifically to make encounters, just because it's and there are a bunch of these, but just because it's helpful. So I guess I do, but I mean, there's a bunch of filters to like make it very specific. But I guess it's true. No, I do use a random encounter generator. It's not really a random. It's just an encounter generator. There's nothing random about it. It's not specifically for random encounters. It's for any encounter. So I do use that, and that is useful. But I mean, I guess that's true. No, it's just plain useful. That is, you know what? I take back what I said about the hard disagree. Like that is just generally useful for any dungeon master. Is to have a digital way to make encounters is much easier than making encounters by hand. I gotta tell you, that's why I don't do it. But I also don't have an initiative tracker. I have not come across a system, though I'm sure there's things like automated initiative in some of the virtual tabletops. But otherwise, I haven't come across any system I think of initiative tracking that's any faster than write it down on pencil and paper. I still haven't done that. I do it a little bit differently now because I use that sort of passive initiative, and that just makes things easier. But yeah, so yeah, I think that's just what I want to do. Focus on running the game, and I think as you run the game, and you learn more stuff, and you get that experience, and through all the victories and the pitfalls of all the stuff you screw up along the way, and you will, we all do, and that will never stop. You will always screw up. You will never be perfect. Sorry. So you're gonna run that game, and as you do that, you're gonna be, just like we said with like the prep and improvisation, you're going to be able to better understand your style as a DM and what tools and resources are useful for you. So it's not useful to try to get a bunch of tools that you don't know that you need yet. Have the need, get the tool to meet the need. You don't have a tool and then invent needs for the tool. That's not useful. That's not useful. Yeah, I mean, you just go watch the old Shia LaBeouf Do It video, right? Just go watch that, and you just do it. Stop waiting for plans to align the perfect suite of tools, and just like get in there, just get behind the screen and run some D&D. That's all you got to do. And like I said earlier, that you will always be a better dungeon master the next time you do it if you keep working at it. That's all you got to do is show up and keep working at it, and eventually you will become asterisk, but you will become a good dungeon master just by showing up and trying to work on being a better dungeon master. Those are really the only two things you need to do to be a good dungeon master, is be a dungeon master consistently and continue working on trying to be a good dungeon master consistently. That's it. You just kind of have to keep at it, and you'll get better at running games, and you'll have a better sense of what the strategies, the tips, the tools, whatever you need. You'll move from being like, I don't know how to dungeon master, to a point where I don't know how to do this one thing. I don't know how to do this one situation that I want to do for an adventure. Like, I don't know how to do ship combat. Let me figure out ship combat, something to do with ship combat real fast, or something like that. Like, you'll have very specific, honed queries that you'll resolve as you become a more proficient dungeon master, and not like, how do I, these big, like, open-ended questions like, how do I run a game of D&D? Well, I don't know. No game of D&D is the same, so I don't know how you run your game of D&D. But yeah, that's the end. That's the end. So kind of 10 was the only one that I really had a hard disagree with, and that's just because, with the exception of a few tools like something like encounter generators, you don't really need a lot to be a dungeon master. I mean, you're probably gonna need some dice. So probably need some dice. You need a notebook or notepad, something to take notes on. You're gonna need an adventure, so you're either gonna have to make that or, get one from somewhere and prep it, like read it and figure out what it is. I mean, that's kind of it. You don't even need the Dungeon Master screen if you don't want it. I usually don't play with one. But to each their own. And then a little like quick reference sheet, something that'll give you. I have one that's on DriveThruRPG. It's a little outdated now because it's for 5e and not D&D 2024. But I still have that. But yeah, that's it. So conclusion. Did this work? Did AI? What is our final here? Do we think the ChatGPT can teach you how to be a dungeon master? No, not really. And that's the problem with. And I should clarify that I use AI. I've used AI for work and stuff like that. I am very comfortable with the limitations of what it is. And it's because of I think the nature. I work a lot with sort of like creatives who are impacted by things like AI. And also I work with creative people, and the stuff that most AIs throw out, it's not anywhere close to it, right? It's just, AI is I said in the beginning, so I don't want to preach about it, but it is kind of files everything down to the lowest common denominator. So that's what we've got here. We've got the it's hard to say it. The basic bitch version of D&D advice for new dungeon masters. That's what we have. Like the most bland stuff. Like looking through it, like start small with a one shot adventure. That's pretty much the advice everybody gives somebody who's interested in being a dungeon master. Is go run a one shot. Right? That's the old Matt Colville. Run the tomb. What is his adventure called? The Delian Tomb. Right? It's just it's like a 3-room dungeon. Grab it, grab some characters, grab some friends around the table, grab some dice, print out your little adventure if you're gonna play in person, and just run it. Yep. I mean, but that's such basic advice that it's not really useful in a tip because you would have to be so brand new to being the thought of being a dungeon master to get use out of that tip. Otherwise, you've probably heard this echo chamber of a quick tip from a million different voices. Because it literally is tip number 1, basically, for any new prospective DM. And yeah, it gives you, like, it is helpful to DM's Guild, DriveThruRPG, or the official D&D website, or one-page dungeon contest, or there's a lot of places you can get super simple adventures that are meant to be played in one sitting, basically. One and done. But as we said, you're never going to know whether that's going to be a good adventure or not. Sure, there's going to be highly rated adventures, but you don't know if you can pull that adventure off as a new DM, and you don't know. There's no. Oftentimes, when you get a published adventure module, and one of the things I don't like about published adventure modules is you don't really know, whenever you pick one up, how much improvising you're going to have to do until you read the whole thing. And if you read the whole thing, you'll be like, oh, man, I feel like I'm going to have to improvise a lot on this. Like, there's a lot of, like, this is really bare bones adventure. At that point, you're like, is it worth running anything that's already published? Like, adhering to any part of this constructed adventure if I'm already going to feel like I'm improvising over 50% of it? Like, maybe I should just run my own improvised adventure. Then what is the value that I'm getting out of running the one-shot? A published module one-shot. So, thoughts. Prioritize storytelling over rules. Like I said, I don't think that's great advice for if you're playing with people who already know how to play D&D. Because you're gonna have some rules friction if you do everything by rule of cool, and other people don't want that. So yeah, story. I don't know. It depends on where you fall on that sort of story narrative to simulationist kind of gamut of scale as a player or a dungeon master. Like, I feel like I've been all over the gamut in my career. I feel like I started very hard in the sort of simulationist side, very old school D&D kind of style, and then went all the way to the other side and was very heavy narrative. And now I'm more closer to the middle. I guess I like adventure. This could sound probably weird when I say it. I like more narrative-focused campaigns, but I like more simulationist adventures. I'm not sure that makes a lot of cohesive sense, probably. Right then, the idea is that the campaign, the series of adventures stitched together, is the narrative fulfillment part for me. And as far as the individual adventures, I kind of want a little bit more sandboxy. I kind of want a more little character-driven, like where we are leading the action as players, if I'm a player in that game. Or my players are leading the action in the adventure, rather than me doing it as a dungeon master. Keep the game flowing, yeah. Again, tempo, not a thing that I'd bring up to a new dungeon master. They got enough to worry about. They don't need to be worrying about game tempo yet. That's like I said, a more advanced dungeon master thing. That's something that I don't think I even focused on, how to keep the tempo of a game flowing. I don't know, like it, until many, I almost would say years into being a dungeon master running games. where I felt proficient enough in the system I was running and the adventures I was making that I could then now start thinking about the flow of the game at the table and how to improve the table experience of the game. Yeah, keep combat simple. It's really a basic tip. I'm not even sure that's really a tip. It's be like, hey, just don't make things hard on yourself. I mean, I guess that's a tip. I do know. I mean, all right. Let me take that. I'm being a little rough on it. I do want to say that it is common for new players and new dungeon masters to shove everything they can think of into right now. Where they're like, every adventure is this big, bold thing with all this different doodads and whistles and mechanics and stuff, and there is this sort of thing that happens specifically with new dungeon masters where they try to like chock-a-block just stuff everything into an adventure, and you're like, yeah, maybe just spread it out the goodness a little bit between adventures. Like, maybe try like one new thing per adventure, and that's it. Again, right, just keep it simple, because the players are going to make things more complicated. They always will. Be prepared, stay flexible. Yeah, but that's hardly advice. Your advice is to be a good dungeon master, kind of. Great. Adapt to player choices, yeah. Efficient prep was not really helpful. Manage player expectations early. We talked about session 0 and about maybe it's not as useful as I think session 0 is something that like the community, the TTRPG community, sort of like grabbed and like held on high, went ah, and it was like, but I feel like at least it's been my experience that the more that I've done of them, the less useful I think they are. Like I said when I was talking about it, going over in detail, is that I feel like part of session 0 is useful, but not all of it's useful, and it's hard. And the only way to figure out, like, peel away all the extras to get only to the like gooey good stuff that's really important for me for running a good campaign. I would have to run so many session 0s, and I don't want to do that because I'm here to play D&D, not run session 0s before D&D. Right? I'd rather play D&D than talk about playing D&D. Encourage roleplay and engagement. Yeah, we talked very much about this. Ours obviously had a lot. This is probably our chunk. I think this is the chunkiest one, which is kind of surprising. Yeah, I think that's the chunkiest advice we really got. Was that tip? Which is interesting. Yeah. Learn to improvise again. We're getting to the part where they start retreading kind of the same tips. Yeah, I mean, how do you work on improvising other than trying to do improvising exercises or just improvising as a dungeon master? So it's less about, again, working on improvising and just working on trying to figure out what you don't need to prep. And over time, that will be more and more stuff, usually. Don't be afraid to make mistakes. Again, that one should be really high up there. That's probably the best advice. And yeah, I'd say tip 8 is maybe the best actual tip in here. I mean, other than the tip 1, which is run one-shots, that's the easiest one. But I think otherwise this is probably the biggest one. It's just to come to the realization you're not going to be a good dungeon master. You're going to screw up a bunch of stuff. It's fine. Just keep moving. Keep your feet moving. And if you keep doing it again and again, you'll screw up less and less. And you'll make less, like, egregious screw-ups. And eventually you'll run a relatively mistake-free game. I mean, you're always going to have some mistakes. Like I said, I don't think I've ever run an adventure I didn't screw up in some form or fashion. So, don't sweat the small stuff. Like, it's going to happen. Don't let that be the thing that keeps you from running the game. The same way that with the tip 10, like, don't let not having tools and resources be the thing that keeps you from running the game. If you want to run the game, just go run the game. You can do it. I believe in you. You can do this. I can do it, and I don't have anything special, so you can certainly do it. And then we skipped over it, but tip 9, you keep the pace moving. Again, not a newbie DM thing. Yeah, I think it's an important thing once you're an intermediate dungeon master and you want to keep becoming a better dungeon master, you start to look at things like pacing and figuring out, okay, how can I make the experience of playing in my game better, that people want to do it more. And I'm excited to help. And I'm excited about it too. I mean, that's it. So ChatGPT did not do a particularly great job. Like I said, it kind of rushed down the lowest common denominator, so we got kind of what's kind of caught in the metaphorical grease trap here, as far as advice kind of comes for new dungeon masters. But hopefully I added a lot of my own editorial, and hopefully that was useful for you. If it was useful for you, you could throw a like on this video, maybe a little subscribe. Leave a comment if you have questions, or you want me to cover something specific, or you're wondering about something else. Definitely leave comments. Those are helpful, as well as sharing the content. You can always share the content on social media, your X, your Instagrams, people still use Facebook, right? Facebook, I guess. TikTok, forums, Reddit, wherever. Share it. Get it out there. If this helped you, that's the best thing you can do, is try to help get it in front of other people. Otherwise, of course, we have the DriveThruRPG shop, and all those links and stuff are down in the description. If you want to check out that quick reference I talked about, that's still up there. It is 5th edition, so if you're playing legacy stuff, most of that stuff's the same for 2024, but I do know things changed, like the exhaustion rules are not the same, but most of it's still useful for 2024. We have the coffee link, we have the blog, if you want to see more in-depth stuff like this, redragonfiend.com. I think that's it. Thanks for hanging out with me, guys. We'll do this again soon. Have a great day. Or night. I don't know what time it is for you. I think I'm going to cut the feed. We're done. Alright. Bye, guys. I'll see you guys later.